Hey guys, welcome back to another Tech Show video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Samsung i760, a Verizon exclusive smartphone from 2007. Now I usually review old phones based on something I find to be interesting about them, and while this is not really an exception to that rule, it is a pretty typical smartphone from 2007. That being said, let's start off with the little things that make this phone a little bit different. And first off, just the name of the phone is not typical of a Samsung device. i760, believe it or not, is the only name this phone goes by. There's no catchy or weird nicknames that Samsung usually gives their devices. This could, however, be named after the Samsung i700, a Windows mobile smartphone from 2004. No one ever mentioned that this phone was supposed to be a successor to the i700, but I guess Samsung thought so. Anyway, the next kind of unusual thing about this phone is its design, as you may have already noticed. Not only do we have a physical dial pad on a touchscreen phone, they're all a little bit rotated, which gives this device a very distinct look. Many people commented about its chunky, boxy design made it purely a business phone. So you're definitely not going to mistake this phone for any other device, and while the back of the phone is fairly nondescript, you still can't really mistake it for any other device. The battery sticks off the phone as if it doesn't really belong, and the little 1.3 megapixel camera is surrounded by this big silver bezel that contains the word 1.3 megapixels twice, and a little photo flash, which we'll talk about later. The design of this phone is overall pretty cheap feeling, and that only gets more evident based on the amount of issues this phone is known to have. The first i760 I bought had a faulty touchscreen, which when I researched the issue, appeared to be a common issue with these devices. I got another one with a good touchscreen, but even this one sometimes doesn't register my taps, and it's not just because it's a resistive touchscreen. I have multiple pocket PCs and cell phones with resistive displays that work quite a bit better than this one. Another thing that has failed on both of my i760s are these side buttons. They no longer spring back when pressed and seem to be stuck pressed down. They do sometimes function if you press them very firmly, but most of the time they don't work at all. And another complaint, not so much a quality problem, but more of a design flaw, the power button is up on top where it's kind of hard to reach. But not only that, the power button is very flat and small, making it hard to press. And even when you do press it, it doesn't always register your presses, which is kind of annoying. But other than those things, this phone has held together pretty well, and I guess I shouldn't expect a phone from 2007 to still be perfectly functional. The slide-out keyboard still works great and has a nice click sound while typing. It is a tiny bit cramped near the top of the keyboard because the top part of the slider doesn't seem to slide up enough. And it's definitely not defective, that's just the way it was designed. Of course you can type on the touchscreen with the stylus, but that's not very practical for obvious reasons. What you don't get is handwriting recognition like what you'd get on a Pocket PC, which I guess makes sense given the screen size and the fact that you have a full QWERTY keyboard, which definitely works better than any 2007 handwriting recognition software would have. And speaking of software, the i760 is running Windows Mobile 6, which really gives you an idea of the kind of consumers Samsung was marketing this device to. In 2007, the phone you chose to buy greatly affected what you could do with it. Unlike Androids and iPhones of today, where you can pretty much do the same stuff no matter what you choose, the phones of that time really fell into one of three categories. The first category was basic phones for calling and texting and not much else. The second category was media phones for listening to music, streaming video, playing games, and stuff like that. And then there was the third category, which was the business and power user type devices like the i760. Since this phone is running Windows Mobile, it doesn't get access to Verizon VCast services, so no music streaming, mobile TV, games, and all that other stuff that VCast offered. So this obviously wasn't meant to be a media phone, but that doesn't mean it isn't a fun phone. You do get Windows Media Player and a microSD card slot, so you can load as many movies and music as you like, as long as they'll fit onto your SD card of choice. This phone doesn't have a 3.5mm headphone port, but it does have a 2.5mm headphone port that works just fine with a dongle, which are easy to find super cheap on Amazon. I don't usually bother to test out old phones' ability to play music over headphones because there's usually no real reason to. However, I just had to test out the i760's music playing features because this phone includes an app called R2VS. This app has features similar to the SRS features found in Windows Media Player on desktop computers. It's actually quite a bit more comprehensive and fun to play with though than SRS. It has a whole audio equalizer and some pretty cool 3D audio effects that make this phone feel more like a media phone than I first thought. Playing music was great on this phone and I had no complaints about audio quality. Even through Bluetooth headphones and speakers, audio quality was superb across all apps and games. And speaking of apps and games, since this is a Windows mobile device, there are a lot of applications you can install to add functionality to the phone. Hundreds of Windows mobile applications and games are still out there, many of which you can find on websites like oldhandhelds.com, which are free to download. And since this smartphone has Wi-Fi capability built in, you can download many of these free apps directly to the phone over Wi-Fi with the Opera Mini browser. Some of them will require you to connect the phone to a computer to install over ActiveSync though, so keep that in mind for any mobile devices that are refusing to run an exe file. Now let's talk about this camera. There's not really much to say here except that it's pretty much what I expected. I wasn't disappointed by the quality of the photos, but that's probably because I didn't have any expectations for this camera in the first place. If I had been looking for a camera phone, this probably wouldn't be my first choice. But on the other hand, since this is a Windows mobile device, there were probably plenty of photo editing apps that would have made this phone worth it to some people. Being able to edit your photos on your phone wasn't quite a mainstream idea at the time, so this device might have appealed to people for that very reason. And again, the photo quality isn't that bad. In fact, it shoots at a resolution of 1280 by 960, which is high enough that if you just look at the photos on this phone's display, they will look just fine. Unless you zoom in very close, which you probably wouldn't even be doing anyway. The photo flash was probably one of the more impressive features of this camera, at the time at least, because, as you may have guessed, this camera's low light performance isn't all that great. The flash isn't that great either, but it definitely works if you're trying to take photos in the dark, and I've definitely seen some dimmer smartphone photo flashes. Anyway, this 1.3 megapixel camera is pretty typical for the time, but it's not bad. In general, I think this phone is pretty good, especially considering what other phones were out at the time. This large touchscreen display is a pretty big contrast in comparison to the Blackberries and Nokias that were so popular at the time. This phone did come at a cost though, as it was priced at about $350 on release. Adjusted for inflation, that's almost $500 in 2022, and that doesn't even include the extra costs of the required 1-year contract with Verizon. But if you needed a then high-spec device running Windows, this would have definitely been your best option. Of course, phone reviewers were quick to make fun of the unattractive business phone design, but that's really what it was. Normal users didn't really like Windows Mobile because it was too complicated and not very cool. If you were looking for a Windows mobile phone, chances are you didn't really care what it looked like as long as it was able to do things like connect to Wi-Fi and create Excel spreadsheets, not to mention those thousands of third-party apps that were available for Windows Mobile. With all that to offer, this phone really was its own thing. Ugly design or not, there were no competitors to this device running Windows Mobile in 2007. The i760 combined work and some fun to create a truly powerful smartphone. Thank you so much for watching this video, and hey, if you've made it this far, you might as well subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. And please leave your suggestions and comments below, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching, I'll see you in the next video.